Hey folks, Matt from artoftheimage.com. A lot of new cameras out lately, a lot of them coming out, and as always, it gets confusing for people just getting into their first DSLR or their first interchangeable lens camera. And we have a question from a viewer pertaining to that. They're not sure what to buy because there are so many choices. So Hassan is writing in, and he says, I want to buy my first DSLR. My choices are the Nikon D5500, D7100, D7200, the Canon 80D, I think you mean 80D, and the 77D. I don't understand which to buy. Mostly I like to take photos. Photography is my number one. Please help. So I think a lot of people are in your position, Hassan, and that's why I answer a lot of these questions, because I think each time I answer it, it helps people think through it a bit more. And that's all I'm really trying to do, is give you some of my experience and which way I would go in a given situation and why. And then hopefully maybe some of that is pertinent to how you're going to make your decision, and at least gives you a little bit more ammunition to think it through for yourself. And I always do recommend too, and sometimes maybe I forget to say it, but get out to the store and get your hands on them too, because sometimes in the end, the cameras are so close anyways that sometimes it's a question of preference. You may get your hands on a Canon 80D and really like the layout and the function of it, which is different than the layout and the function of, say, a Nikon D7200, and one might tweak it more for you than the other. You might like the 7200, the Nikon layout and the way the Nikon ergonomics are, or you might prefer the Canon. People usually do one way or the other. Certainly if you've been shooting one system for a while, you really get used to one, and it can be a little bit of a process going back to the other. What you've laid out here, D5500, which obviously there's a 5600 out now, but you could save money and get a 55, and there's not a lot of difference there. So that's a good choice in your choices. 7100 versus 7200, that's a little tricky between the two, because you can save money on the 7100, and really the only advantage you're getting on the 7200 is a deeper buffer for shots, so you can shoot more shots faster without filling up the buffer and the camera bricking up, as it were. In other words, you have to wait for it because you've shot, if you shoot a high frame rates, if you're into frames per second and doing, machine gunning, the 7200 is probably your better camera there. Instance of where you're going to use that: sports photography, birds, wildlife, things where you're shooting a high frame rate to try to capture something in motion that's moving quickly. In that case, the 7200 is probably going to be an advantage to that style of photographer. If that's not your style, then I would wholeheartedly go with the 7100 and save some money. The Canon 80D and the 77D. 77D is a little newer. This is a tough one, because depending on the pricing, you can get 80Ds refurbed from Canon, which is a really good way to buy them. I really like doing that. They're a new camera. It's been dialed in. It might have come back off the line because something was out of spec, but you've had a technician dial it in, and you've got in some ways that's a better camera than one that just came off the line and met the spec of error, like the margin of error. So I've never had a problem buying, a true factory refurb like that, where it's just, off the line, had a little tweak, and it's back in the box at a much better price. My thoughts between the two there is the 80D I will go with over the 77, although they're so close that if you did for some reason prefer the 77, maybe just because it's newer, maybe because you are getting a better price on it in your area, then I certainly wouldn't have a problem with you going with it. The 80D, I think, is just a little bit higher up the food chain, so a little bit closer to, say, a pro body, a little bit, higher body. It's got a few more features, perhaps a little bit better build quality. It certainly does as far as in the Canon lineup and how they would bill it, but I don't have any problem with the build quality of the 77. That's why, if it sounds like I'm kind of in the middle on those two, I kind of am, because to me it would almost come down to price, but I do have good warm fuzzy feelings with the 80D. I've shot it. I like it. It's a great camera. Between the Nikons and the Canons, if your primary concern is photography, which it is, that's what you're saying, mostly you like to take photos, photography is my number one, the Nikons do have the edge. The sensor's a little bit better, it performs a little bit better, it's a little bit better high ISO, it's a little bit better dynamic range. All of the metrics of sensor evaluation are better. You're getting a better performing sensor. Not by a long shot. I just want to clarify that. But it is ultimately a better performing sensor than, say, the sensor in the 80D and the 77D. Same resolution, 24 megapixels in all these cameras, but a little bit better performance out of the Nikons. Now, where the Canon starts to lead is the Canon is a little bit better performing camera, at least those two Canons versus those Nikons, is a little bit better performing camera if you're doing a mix of video and photography. And if it gets closer to, and you've said photography is your number one concern, but if say you're somebody that's shooting photos and video, then I'd be leaning more towards the 80D or the 77D over the Nikons. If all I'm shooting is photography and no interest in photography, then I'm going with one of those Nikons. For me, I would either get the 7100 or the 7200, and it would depend solely on the best price I could get. I would probably get a factory refurb or a sale, and if I could get a significant cost savings on the 7100, then I would go with it. If it was in $50 or $100, I would probably get the 72 just for that extra shot depth buffer, the buffer depth for shooting, for faster shooting. Also, it's going to impact your resale. So if you can get them very close in price, 7200 down the road is going to sell at a higher price for you because it is a newer camera. So that's something that I don't always bring up, but something you should think about too if you're thinking you might flip the camera down the road, because a lot of us do that. Anyways, what do you guys think? Do you agree with my thinking on this and which way to go when you're trying to decide between these, as Hassan is? What would you choose and why? Let me know in the comments below. Let's help out Hassan. Thanks for your question. Stay tuned. We'll be back soon here at artoftheimage.com.